Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Training, Learning, and Development Communities event, Transitioning to Learning and Development, our first virtual conference about this of the year. Well, actually, we did do one earlier this year that was about teaching to instructional design, but this one has a little bit of a different flavor to it. And I hope you guys are enjoying everything. Yesterday was fantastic. This morning with Kara was great. And I see the virtual tables have been busy all morning. Ricky Fisher was in there and Christina Archer. Hope you guys are jumping into those and enjoying them as well. This next session, we have Rick Jacobs, who is a first-time speaker for TLDC. He's going to be talking about transitioning to corporate ID, the promise and the pitfalls. And I have a little intro for Rick here. He's the principal of Jacobs et al. LLC, started in the early 90s as a firearms instructor, range master, firearms salesman, and worked as a law enforcement supply at a law enforcement supply store as a second job while a freelance creative director. He was hired to teach graphic and web design and software applications at Utah Career College based on his portfolio reputation, and had a reputation of developing perfect files. And all of this led Rick over to L&D, and that's where we are now. Rick also has like this incredible series of posts that he's been doing on LinkedIn. Is it unpopular post or unpopular opinion? What
unpopular position posts?
Okay, unpopular position posts on LinkedIn. Follow Rick on LinkedIn and check those out. They're great, and it's actually, I think, what led Kayleen Holt to recommending Rick for this particular event. He brings his experiences and techniques from different industries and applies them to all he does, creating some very effective and successful training programs, as well as helping organizations develop compelling hiring, training practices. So I'm going to go ahead and hide myself from the screen, and I'll let Rick take it away.
Hi, y'all. Appreciate you being here for my inaugural presentation for TTULD. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to y'all. Real quick, I want to post a poll and have y'all respond to it. Would you rather get paid a lot for work you hate or paid little for work you love? I know that's almost a loaded question for teachers, because pretty much y'all love your work, and we all know that teachers aren't paid very well. So we'll let that go for a few minutes. It's kind of fun to watch these numbers change and move up. I almost feel like we're watching a race. Anybody have a betting table on the side, or start to keeps moving? It looks like we're pretty solid at 10%. I can work through anything, just pay me. 70% is I would rather love my work, pay is meh. And then about 20% are I don't love or hate work, just pay me. That's the reason I asked this question is because you're going to run into all three of these kind of situations when you work in corporate learning and development. And it was kind of a surprising experience for me. And I figured that the way I would start this presentation is give you my background and what led me to where I am today. And first off, my unpopular position posts are pretty much my way of venting, but also to create conversation and debate. I don't claim to be an expert in anything. I don't claim to know everything. Matter of fact, I'm more afraid of what I don't know than what I do know. And so I'm always seeking knowledge. I'm always seeking learning. I want to make sure that things are right and I'm doing things right. And I'm perfectly fine with being wrong, as long as someone can tell me how I'm wrong and how I can be right. You don't find that a whole lot in the corporate world, but you find it pretty much the same in government roles. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this poll. It looks like our final numbers are most people would rather love your work and the pay is met, which is good, because that is one of the things you're going to be facing a lot when you work in corporate L&D. So real quick, I'm going to walk through my background. I'd rather spend a lot of time answering questions and talking about my experiences and share with you that and how I came up with my unpopular positions, and give you the opportunity to ask about specifics about anything involving the job. So first of all, who I am. I have been in. I've done a lot of stuff. I learned very early on when I graduated high school. I was supposed to ship out for Army basic training, and wasn't able to. My family left, moved to another state, and I was left in New Hampshire. And for the next 3 years, I went between hunger and homelessness. And I learned very quickly that to eat, you should have multiple skill sets. So I always made sure that I had multiple skill sets so I could do multiple things so I could make sure that I could eat more regularly. That I didn't realize that what that would do for me as far as getting me to where I am today in the work that I do, but it explains my disparate background. A lot of people, when they look at my resumes or look at my LinkedIn profile, it looks like I've done a lot of things that aren't connected, but all the things I do boil down to three things that motivate me in life. First off, I've been an entrepreneur longer than I've been an adult. I owned my first company when I was 14. I had a company in Lubbock, Texas called Lizard Industries, and I cleaned offices in a strip mall. I've always been very driven and very eager to do my own thing. It helped with how I was raised, where I was expected to pretty much pay my way through high school, let alone pay my way through college. So I started out as an entrepreneur very quickly. And in order to be a successful entrepreneur, not claiming that I have always been, but you have to really study. You have to learn, you have to research, and you have to seek out the things that you don't know about in order to protect your line. So I've owned several businesses throughout my life. I've been a freelance photographer, professional photographer, freelance graphic artist, and creative director. The picture you see on the screen is a rental photo studio that I built with the goal of eventually that rental photo studio would be a server farm for some web technology and software programs that I was working on. I've also run a software company that was actually tracking training software for public safety. So I'm also a big kid. I don't sit still well. I'm a big goofball. Meetings have always been interesting. My teammates love my meetings. My managers always hated it when I was in meetings because I would say the things that people were thinking because I really don't have a filter. But I like to goof off a lot. And matter of fact, my first instructional design job, which was with the federal government, I was working for the Department of Defense. I was in an interview and I was partly stoned because I had just injured my shoulder in a training accident in law enforcement, and I was on pain medications. And there are certain questions I don't like in interviews, and my biggest pet peeve is tell me about your greatest weakness. I hate that question because to me that question is essentially saying lie to me and make it sound like it's true, or how well can you spin something to make it sound true when it's really BS. I'm not much for BS. So I was sitting there, the program manager, the government servant was sitting there, and they said, okay, Rick, tell us what your greatest weakness is. And I literally slumped, rolled my eyes, and I said, I'm lazy. And they looked shocked. And they were like, what? Explain more. And I realized I had said that out loud. And now I'm like, okay, I'm just going to own this and tell the truth. I said, I'm lazy. I don't like working. I want to goof off. So I'm going to do all my work as quickly and as perfectly as possible so I can get back to goofing off. I realized I was telling the truth. I don't like to work. I want to play. I want to play with my kids. That's my daughter, by the way, with the giraffe tongue. But I like playing. I like goofing off. I like having fun. So they were surprised by that, and I got the job. I would not recommend trying that in your interviews, by the way. I was fortunate that these guys saw me for what I was. But I lived up to that standard, and I goofed off a lot. But my idea of goofing off was reading and studying and going into certain closets where they had books and files on lessons learned, reading about that stuff so I could be a better employee. But I also don't sit still well, so I would take on work that people didn't know they needed. One of the final things I did for this job in the Department of Defense was I did an analysis of all their training material. I went through and analyzed all their training material, all their learning objectives, and created this giant presentation where I took their 84 training objectives, reworked them into about 20 training objectives, and found gaps that were missing in their training programs and in products. We ended up developing 4 more training programs for the schoolhouse within the Department of Defense. But I finished my work as fast as possible, as perfectly as possible, so I could get back to goofing off. The way I introduce myself typically is I'm an artist, a philosopher, and a cop. And when I used to teach, I taught at a trade school, and I've taught as adjunct faculty at several universities and community colleges. I find that I really enjoy working at the community colleges more than the 4-year universities. You seem to find people in trade schools were the best, absolute best. You have people who are earnest about wanting to learn. But I would introduce myself as artist, philosopher, cop. And people were baffled by that. They're like, well, I understand artist and philosopher, they're thinky and they're creative, but cops don't think and cops aren't creative. And I would answer that with, well, you don't understand how creative a cop can be until you're talking that 6'4", 400-pound drunk dude into losing his freedom. You become very creative and you become very thinky at that point. Because I'm only 5'9". At the time I was pushing 160. I'm not going to win a fight with most people. So the thing that I found that, and I alluded to this earlier, the thing that I found that I really enjoy about all 3 of these roles and what I love most about instructional design is that all 3 of them, artist, philosopher, cop, are also analysis, persuasion, and creativity. The analysis part, a person with a bachelor's degree, and I have a bachelor's degree in philosophy from the University of Utah. I tell people I have a BS and BS. I actually told the department heads at the University of Utah that I was getting a BS and BS, and my undergraduate advisor, who was a good friend of mine, laughed his butt off, but all the other stuff sure it's kind of like harumphed, and it's like, oh, I don't know about that. But it also helps in that philosophy degrees are essentially training for critical thinking and persuasion. And people don't understand that getting a degree in philosophy is really tedious because you have to do a lot of reading, you have to do a lot of analysis, you have to analyze arguments, and you have to break down your arguments into succinct writing, as I just saw someone comment. But you also have to get a wealth of information across very quickly and very accurately. And I found that really helped in instructional design, because instructional design should be a lot more about analysis than it is what it currently is in the corporate world. The artist part of it, being a graphic artist, really helped me prepare as an instructional designer as well, because graphic art, if you're going to use the happy rainbow words, it's about communication. It's about disseminating information in a way that people can understand. In reality, and in the world that I like to live in, graphic design is nothing more than propaganda. It's an attempt to sway a population to believe the way you want them to believe, so they're going to buy your ho-hos, or they're going to buy your Tide, or they're going to buy a Tesla. So, but I found that all 3 of these things were very complementary when it came to working in instructional design. The problem came when I discovered the difference between what I was doing in the real world and instructional design. I'm also experienced. I've seen the dark side of the world. I've been in the ugly places. And so that kind of gives me a little bit of a sarcastic and dark humor. But it also means that I just don't have the energy or the time to put up with BS. And I don't have the energy and time to blow smoke. So that doesn't make me very popular with people who are in management positions in a corporation, in businesses. They want to be. It's kind of an aristocracy. So my biggest challenges have been working for people who would rather believe their own fiction than actually listen to the reality of situations. So, this image is from I was in New York City doing recovery efforts for 9/11, and it just really wakes you up. You start seeing the world in a different way, and you find out what's important. And that really influences my perception in instructional design because it gives me a passion for wanting to see people succeed and enjoy their best lives. But it also gives me a passion for wanting them to just get the facts, get the truth, and understand what it is that it's expected of them. The thing is that one of the things that you're finding now, especially with being teachers moving into instructional design, it's very competitive. It's extremely competitive. And businesses don't make it any easier for you. The reason they don't make it easier for you is because they don't understand instructional design anymore than a lot of people who are trying to transition. And it's not just teachers. There is a component of people. I've had people actually tell me they want to work less, so they want to get into training. And when I heard that, I was baffled that somebody could actually believe that training is working less. If anything, you're working a lot more, and you're working at times that you're not even getting paid for it. I know that y'all can relate to this, but there were times where I was at home planning and plotting how I was going to do things at work, but I had to punch the clock every day, so I only got paid for what I did at the office. I didn't get paid for all the work I did outside of work because I wanted to serve. I see instructional design, learning development, as we are advocates for the participants. I don't like using the word learner, by the way, so if I say it, it's an accident, but I see us as advocates for the participant because businesses don't understand what they want from their people any more than what businesses understand what they want from instructional design. So your competition is everyone, and unfortunately, the bell curve of instructional design are people who don't understand the rules themselves. And so you have a lot of people, and Kara North and I were talking about this yesterday. There are a lot of academies out there who are people who don't know anything more than what you do, and in a lot of cases, they actually know less. Teachers, I absolutely love the idea of teachers coming in, but I've actually had a manager when I tried to hire a teacher friend of mine who said, I don't want to hire teachers. I don't like hiring teachers. They think they know everything. And they think that, and I was like, dude, they have 80%, 90% of what an actual instructional designer needs to have, but they're in the same position I was when I came into instructional design. Overwhelmingly, people who go into instructional design go into it by accident. The way businesses promote people into instructional design is, hey, you're really good at your job. I want you to train all the new people. It's like, oh, wow, you do really well at training and you made a PowerPoint. You're now an instructional designer. That's overwhelmingly how people become instructional designers in business. So for my background, I started out in photography, and when I bought my first camera, I wanted to learn everything I could about it. So I spent hundreds of dollars on rolls of film and notebooks where I would take a picture, record what was on the camera, and write down what frame number it was. And I would do that so I could learn exactly the relationship of the three things between on a camera. The f-stop, the shutter speed, and the ISA or the ASA of the film, the speed of the film. So I'm learning all these things and keeping track of it. I didn't realize that I was already doing a task analysis. Then I became after a year of working on this and building a portfolio, I became a professional photographer, shooting model portfolios, shooting covers for magazines, shooting as a photojournalist, and I loved it. But then I moved from New Hampshire, where I became a photographer, to Utah, where anybody with a camera calls themselves a professional photographer. By the way, I typically find myself passionate about creative jobs that eventually the industry wrecks because there's so many people who don't know what they're doing, who claim to be what they are, and then just crushing the industry. So with the advent of digital cameras, everyone with a digital camera is now a professional. They put their camera on P and think that they're a professional. So I started working for a printing company, and as a photographer shooting wedding announcements. But when it was downtime, I've told y'all I'm very driven and I seek to learn. I learned everything I could about the printing industry, and that's how I discovered graphic design. I learned how color models work. I learned stripping. I learned press systems, and I started learning how to do typesetting in Corp Express when it was 2.0. I was learning all this stuff, and I was like, I really love this graphic design bit because it's a new challenge. It's answering riddles. And then graphic design I sought a job working at the University of Utah while I was working on my degree in the art lab. So I learned all the software, Photoshop, Illustrator, Quark Express. And then I started learning this new thing called the internet. And I taught myself HTML. I started doing web design in 1996. I remember when tables came out in HTML, and we were like, holy mother of green, this is amazing. I can stack stuff and move things. But then I would take and go into the JavaScript and decide, can I break it? And I learned things by breaking things. Well, learning how to break things actually led me into becoming a better graphic designer and becoming freelance, where all my clients were by recommendation. I worked for a couple international advertising agencies, and I worked for national print companies, where somebody would call a printing house and say, I need a catalog. And the company would like, well, if you want perfect files, if you want an easy job, you're going to call Rick Jacobs. And that was my reputation. That led me into teaching at the trade school. And they asked me to teach graphic design. They had just had a guy quit because he was beat up by the people in the class. And they say, can you handle it? And I said, sure. And this is where I got the experience of the difference between education and training. I had to develop courseware on Adobe, Photoshop, Illustrator, Quark Express, and I was hired to teach web design and teach HTML. And it just seemed intuitive to me that the way I learned was by trying and building things and breaking things and then fixing things. So that's how I developed my training. I thought I was just doing education. I was just being a teacher. But the way I structured my classes was I would walk them through how to do something. And then I would show them an advertisement and say, this is what I built. And this is how I built it. And then I would give them all the pieces and say, I want you to build the same thing. And then I would spend time with each person as they're going through it, working with each person in their own speed of competency. So while a graphic designer, I always had a second job to keep myself out of the basement so I didn't start collecting cats and becoming that weirdo that everyone on the block is afraid of. And my secondary job was as a firearms instructor, range master, at a law enforcement supply store. That led me into law enforcement training. And in 2000, because of Y2K, everyone with a computer is a graphic artist, and my ability to make a living as a graphic artist went down. So I went into law enforcement. I became a deputy sheriff in Virginia and started working at the academy. And even at the academy, this is where I got my first exposure with real training. With the firearms instruction, I was designing my own training, and people were seeking me out because I was hard, I was difficult. Not everyone could pass my classes, and people wanted that. And I saw that people actually want quality training. People want to be challenged and feel like they've learned something. That got me into law enforcement training, and I worked at the academy for a number of years designing programs, and it just seemed like there was a better way of developing training materials. Then in 2006, I crushed a disc on my neck, and there's nothing wrong with cats. I love cats too. I'm just allergic to them. My daughter is too, and I travel too much. So it's nothing wrong with cats. I just didn't want to become a big cat collector. So in 2006, I crushed a disc in my neck in a training accident. I couldn't work full time at the sheriff's office, and I was offered a job at the defense contractor. And this is the first time I ever heard the words instructional designer. I was already doing work for this defense contractor, doing counter interrogation and counter surveillance training for Defense Intelligence Agency. And they really loved my work because I was the secondary interrogator for people who were going over to foreign countries, working at embassies, and we were training them on how to resist interrogation tactics, and I had a lot of fun in that. So when they approached me and said, "Hey, we know that you're struggling with work, and we really love the work you do. Do you want to be an instructional designer?" I'm like, "I have no idea what that is." And they said, "Well, instructional design is essentially the science and process of developing training." And I was like, "You kidding me? There's a science to this? There's processes? Absolutely." So I got the job, and they sent me to a Langevin school called Langevin is the name of the company for instructional design. So I had a week course of how to be an instructional designer. It was a fire hose experience, but it completely opened and changed my world. And ever since then, finding out that there's a science and a process to it, I've been seeking and working at finding the perfect processes. So eventually I left law enforcement. I was medically retired. I started working in the corporate world. And I was super excited. It's like, I love developing training. I love doing the training. And I started applying to corporate world. And I discovered that the corporate world does not appreciate government employee backgrounds. So some of the problem that you're going to have as teachers seeking jobs in the corporate world is they don't understand what it's like to work in government. They don't understand the hierarchy and the decision making, and they pretty much consider they view people who have worked for the government not capable of working in business. I find that bad. I actually had a vice president of Rackspace tell me that because I was a cop, I had been a cop, that I would not be able to take orders from other people. I'm like, are you kidding me? If you ever watched Hill Street Blues or any of the police shows, we're a paramilitary organization. Everything we do is orders. Well, then you wouldn't be able to work for us because you wouldn't be able to work independently. Seriously, for 11 and a half hours, I'm the only person. I'm one of 5 people in 420 square miles taking calls, and for 190,000 people. I'm capable of working independently. What it boiled down to is that he just perceived cops as donut-eating ticket writers who are incapable of creative thought or being able to do the work. He never looked at my 16 years of self-employment as a creative director. He never looked at the businesses that I started and the business background that I had. All he saw was my government role. And having experienced managers who have looked at teacher resumes, that's kind of the same idea. They figure that teachers just go to a school, they give kids a handout, say pass this, and then they drink coffee, eat donuts, and complain about how nobody likes them. It's stupid. It sucks, and I'm sorry that you're going to be faced with that. But nobody's ever going to say that. So there is a bias against teachers, but I don't want this to be about doom and gloom. What I want it to be is there is a way to get in there by showing and talking about the strengths that come with being teachers. Specifically, for what it takes for somebody to be a real instructional designer, y'all have 80 to 90% of the skill set and knowledge. You see all those job descriptions that say, must have an understanding of adult learning theory. Y'all were literally taught that in college. You probably had an entire course on learning theory, whether pedagogy or andragogy. The thing is, and this is going to be a wake-up call for y'all, most businesses don't know what adult learning theory is. I have never once in any of my roles sat down with a table of stakeholders and said, to better prepare this training, should we do it through a concept of scaffolding or constructivism? Is there, which of it? So I've taken it to, if somebody says, do you understand adult learning theory? I'm like, well, which one of the 42 are you concerned with? And they give me the goat eyes, and they're like, okay, so what about Kirkpatrick's evaluation? Well, I understand the 4 levels of Kirkpatrick's evaluation. Tell me about a time in your company where you actually went to a level 3 or level 4 evaluation. They don't know these things. So all these job descriptions where they're talking about, you must know these things, they don't know those things, and they don't know how to know if you know those things. So you need to be aware that a lot of the stuff that they have in those things you can speak to, and you need to speak to it in such a way that you can make it business oriented. Okay, so your competition is everyone else, but there is a path for everyone. All right, so there is a path for you to get these jobs. The path is, and I'm going to be blunt here, one of the things that frustrates me most is reading LinkedIn profiles and reading resumes where you as teachers are making it sound like you're in a business. You're not. You're not at all. Your fourth grade kids are not customers. Your school district is not a business. It is not. Your stakeholders are parents. Your stakeholder in business are a bunch of people who have been promoted to their highest level of failure and are putting on airs about thinking, demonstrating to everybody that they know more than they actually do. So be honest. Embrace the fact that you're teachers. You know how to. One of the things that I found when I start talking to people, there, if you read business magazines, one of the biggest things that businesses complain about is the lack of critical thinking skills and the ability to make decisions based on policy, procedure, the law, and statutes. That's a cop, and that's a teacher. I would be willing to go out on a limb to say that teachers are held to a lot of policies, are held to a lot of laws, and held to a lot of, and having to make decisions. You have to make decisions every day. Own the fact that you work in a school system, and you can show the transferable skills by talking about decision making, about critical thinking, about times that you were faced. I see people put in gap analysis. Absolutely, talk about your gap analysis, but own the fact that the gap analysis is that you had 15 kids in your classroom who couldn't write the letter A. So you spent time doing a task analysis on what they were doing wrong, all 15 kids, and you found out it's because the teacher that had left before was doing absolutely nothing, and you developed a program or you developed a path for them to catch up with the rest of the kids. That's valuable. That's gold. That's the kind of thing that businesses want to hear and the kind of things that businesses want to see. Don't try to BS your way into, no, I'm really an instructional designer because I'm a teacher. Because people who are in business are going to look at that as naive, and they're going to look at it as blowing smoke. They won't trust you. Say that on your resumes and on your LinkedIn, say that you're seeking an instructional design job, and here are the transferable skills that set me apart from the kid who spent 3 months on a computer, and now he's a trainer. Y'all are absolute trainers, and that is super key as well as being for instructional design. I believe the best instructional designers have been teachers and trainers before because they know how to create training and teaching strategies. They know how to create activities on the fly. They know how to read a room to be able to see who it might be suffering, who might be slowing down. And you have that skill set of looking at all these questions were answered wrong. Let's review the material and find out what's wrong. Did people get it wrong because it's the teacher? Is it the material, or is it the classroom? Overwhelmingly, people who became instructional designers only because they did one job in one place, became a trainer, then became an instructional designer. If they don't have that thirst for knowledge and learning how instructional design works, they don't get to that bit. I see a lot of people put in their resumes, you designed, developed, and implemented. That doesn't really mean as much. Talk about how you analyzed a problem. Talk about how you solved a problem. Talk about how you, because design, develop, and implement, everyone does that. Trainers do that. Content developers do that. It's the analysis bit. It's being able to go through 2,500 lines of cancellation data and discovering why people were quitting a product and then changing the training based on what people were saying. I quit this product because I didn't feel I was getting this satisfaction. I can tell you stories about that. It's one of my greatest accomplishments, but it's also one of the greatest hardships I found in business is that even though I had this, I was able to do one project exactly through the instructional design process. They still didn't change the processes for the business. And that's one of the pitfalls. So that's my background and my history. I feel like I've talked way too much just about that. I want to hear more about y'all, and I would rather have a conversation and answer some of your questions. I'm sure I've said things that that might have some of y'all up in arms at this point, but one of the things I loved in some of my interviews is like, can you handle pressure? Can I handle pressure? I was by myself keeping two rival gangs of 40 people from fighting for 30 minutes waiting for backup. Unless somebody's going to die in the business office, I'm pretty comfortable with making decisions and handling stress. Teachers are very capable of handling stress too. And that's something that you need to advertise. Instead of trying to sound like an instructional designer, sound like a teacher who understands the needs of business. And that's what's going to get you across the threshold. So I'm going to leave it open now for questions. And if people have questions, or if you just want to yell at me and tell me I'm wrong, that's fine too.
This has been great, Rick. Wow. I've just been completely engaged in everything you've been saying. What a wonderful story. I'm looking here in chat. I'm not seeing, there's definitely been a lot of conversation. So you're going to want to go back and take a look at some of this stuff. It's really wonderful. Feel free to post your questions in chat or in the Q&A area of the interface if you have any. Would love to hear from anybody. Let's see. Jessica's saying this is such a realistic point of view, but I sometimes feel as though people in the corporate industry don't really understand this point of view.
You're right, and that's why I'm self-employed now. One of the worst experiences I had in a corporate world is with somebody who has an ATD CLPL, CD. I can't remember all the acronyms, but they're a certified learning professional, whatever the L word is after that. They had this certificate, and Karen North and I talked about this, and she said it's changed a lot since this person got theirs, but it was one of the most toxic, narcissistic experiences I had because she was so absolutely 100% certain that her way was the only way and that she knew everything. But she didn't even understand the instructional design process. She fought me on every line. And people in the business, because I built relationships with people in operations. This company was a web hosting company, and I worked at their call center. I would actually go on the floor and talk to people on the call center floor. I would talk to the supervisors. I'd find out their needs. I was analyzing where, I'd frequently there. So they had that relationship with me. But upper management would stay in their offices and make determinations about what they needed on the floor. And so I was always butting heads with them saying, no, that's not what they need. They need this thing. Matter of fact, I drew a lot of ire, but also a lot of praise because there was this one manager who's like, I want this training to do this, and this training should do this, and these are the things we need to do. And his reputation is, you never tell this guy no. Never tell this guy no. So we're in this room full of stakeholders, none of which had been on the floor in years. And he says all these things. And after I'd done my analysis, looked at all the cancellation data, did a task analysis by sitting with about 15 different employees, watching what they did, watching how they handled a call, listening to what they were saying in the calls, taking notes, keeping spreadsheets. I'm a spreadsheet geek. I love that stuff. And then sitting in this room, and he says, so this, and this. I looked him straight in the eye and I said, no. And that's all I said. And he looked like he was like, am I sitting in reality? Am I in the office? What is going on here? And finally, the people who knew me started smirking because they're like, he's got more up his sleeve. So finally I waited for the guy to open his mind and say, okay, you said no. Tell me why you said no. And then I dropped the volume of information, the research, the graphs, the reports that I wrote on the analysis I've done. I said, training should be done this way, and it should be done this way because of all these facts, because of all this data, because of all this information. You've been training people to do this thing, and it turns out that nobody is doing that thing, and you're not setting expectations, you're not doing this, you're not doing that. So the training I'm going to develop is going to do this. So the result was it would take prior in the previous form of the training for people to reach their key performance indicators. It would take them 5 to 6 weeks. When they got done with my training, people are hitting their key performance indicators within 2 days. It was, and it blew them out of the water. If people weren't and they found, the data showed that if they weren't hitting their KPIs within a week, they were eventually going to quit or get fired. And the result is that business unit went from 15 people to having to hire 15 people every 3 months because of the massive expansion of customer usage. The cancellation data dropped significantly. And all it took was setting expectations with the customer. Now, you don't get that opportunity to do that with students so much, but those are the kind of things that business owners or business people need to be aware of. The times that they've let me do it the right way, they've had huge success. But then they always want to just say, well, that was this. It's like, no, this is a process. This is a system. If you accept the process and the system, it will result that way most of the time. There will always be an outlier, but a lot of people, there's such a lack of understanding in instructional design and learning development. And I'm an advocate for a CLO. I don't think learning and development should be in anybody else's department. It should not be in HR, should not be in operations. It should be its own entity, because learning and development can be the third party objective consultant to the business, because they touch everything and their job should be analyzing issues, finding gaps, analyzing data. That's things that teachers do a lot every year anyway. That's something that businesses are always saying, we need more data analysis. We'll hire the people who know how to do data analysis with human behavior, i.e. the teachers. They know how to do that. So if you build your resume to carry on that way, you're going to be, you'll get through the threshold, but when you get when you get into the job, the likelihood of you doing is actually going to be very slim.
Right. Wow, Rick, so sensible. You know, I've got 3 questions in the Q&A, and we're hitting our time here, but let me get these questions over to you.
Sure.
So this one from Laura Bradley: in corporations, what is more common for L&D working arrangements? Is it a lot of independent work with SMEs? Are there large L&D teams? From looking at job descriptions, there seem to be multiple levels of L&D, and I'm not sure where to start.
A lot of it depends on the size of your organization, but it also depends on the savviness of the organization. I worked for a mortgage company that had about 10,000 employees, and I was hired to build their first L&D team. 8 months later, I was laid off because they didn't see it as a revenue-generating organization. Now they've laid off their entire L&D company-wide. They did that 3 months ago. Typically, there's a term we use in learning and development called the unicorn. Companies want to hire somebody who's a SME, who's an instructional designer, who's a trainer, who's an e-learning developer, who's a data analyst. They want to hire somebody that does everything. They want you, but it's an entry-level position with 10 years experience that pays $50,000 a year. That's a very common experience in L&D. So that's why I led off with that poll. Do you want to love what you do and get paid a little? Because teachers are already used to that. So L&D is a very easy thing to move into. I have someone I'm mentoring who has an instructional design position now. She's making $80,000 a year. She's been doing it since I started. I started her in her role in 2017. So she's been doing this for 4 years. She's making $80,000. I have yet to make $80,000 as an instructional designer ever in any company. So it's and what she's doing is she's writing scripts about software for a company who sells software. So she's not even really doing instructional design either, but her benefits are great. She's getting paid well. She's sucking up the work that she's absolutely bored with that's completely below her skill sets for the money and for the income and the benefits.
Oh, and you know what? I just want to say these are the kinds of conversations we have regularly on TLDC, because there is a lot of this that because the industry itself is just so varied in so many different ways, and so it's great that you're addressing that. Next question: what is the most challenging fact about your transition to ID?
I think the most challenging is discovering how it should be done and not having a company that cares. It's training objectives. That's training objectives are there's a lot of conversation. Alex Salas posted something just recently, having spoke with the guy who wrote the Bloom's taxonomy revision. And when they were talking, I was like, okay, what do I not know? I watched the whole thing, and after watching, I was like, he's saying exactly what I've been saying for years. Is that performance outcome? I call them performance outcome, performance objectives now instead of training objectives or learning objectives, because a lot of people in business, and you might see this happen in teaching as well, where people are writing training objectives or learning objectives or performance objectives for what they want them to do in class. And that's not what an objective should be. An objective is what you want them to be able to do once they've left. That's what they're performing. In business, I'm not going to train somebody to discuss something, because nobody discusses this stuff once they leave the training room. They're actually doing it. It's worse. It drives me through the ceiling when I see people use discuss in e-learning. Unless you're going to measure discuss, which is you have people actually discussing it and having a conversation about it, and you have a rubric of their performance showing their proficiency of discuss, then don't use discuss as a training objective. You bring that back to the business, they don't care. They just want the training done. It's like, well, there's a way of doing this. If you let me do it the right way, well, that we're not going to allow you to do the right way. We can get people better. We can get the. I redesigned the new hire training, and I added a middle step, which is my safe place to fail lab, where they would go through scripted phone calls and have to get through the scripted phone calls and perform correctly before they're ever put on the phones. The way they did it and the way they do it now, 2 weeks of fire hose, you're on the phones taking calls. If you can't do it, you're fired. What does that teach people? Imagine if you were doing that to kids in school. I think that the government's making you do that to a degree, but the most challenging fact about my transition was that business decision makers, I don't like calling them leaders because I didn't elect them, and a lot of them don't lead. A lot of decision makers don't understand and don't care enough to want to do things the right way. They just want to check boxes. And that's a very frustrating thing.
Definitely. Got a couple more questions here. This one from Andrea. When you were an adjunct professor going into ID, did you find that at times you had to explain to interviewers that you can develop a module training course quickly? I've had some interviewers assume that I had months and months to prepare my course.
Yeah, that's there's a lot of explanation you have to make. So one of the things about hiring in a corporation is that the first thing you have to get through, your resume has to get past the wall for somebody to look at it and decide that you're somebody they want to talk to. The first interview is typically with somebody who's in HR that has zero experience. They're just looking for, is what your resume equal what's on the job description? They're going to ask you questions, and they're not going to really understand your answers. You're not going to, until you get to a training manager or a training director, will they be able to understand that your paradigm. And that's essentially what the wall is getting your paradigm through it. So, and that's why a lot of teachers think that by writing their resume and their LinkedIn profile that my job as a teacher was really instructional design can really hurt you, because the hiring managers that know enough are just think you're BSing your way through it. But if you write it to, I understand how this translates into business needs, then they're going to be more willing. It's like, well, that's actually interesting. I understand the things in your job description because I'm educated in that, but this is how I would apply it to business. Now you can get through those first two walls and then explain to the training manager who may or may not understand either. Most of the training managers I've had, most of the directors I've had no experience as trainers, had no experience in instructional design. They were somebody who did really well in sales. And because they were very good at sales, they could train other people how to be sales. So you need to be able to find that balance between using big words that people in the industry would understand and small words for people who have no idea what you're talking about. Did I answer your question? I don't know if I answered it well enough.
I liked it, Rick. That's good. One last question. This one's from Susan. You might have mentioned this. Have you been in a corporate or entrepreneurial situation where you were the only person there knowledgeable on how to create training? It can be challenging to be the only one rather than being part of an L&D team.
Yes, absolutely, unequivocally. The last job, so I was laid off twice in a year. Once because of COVID, and second time because the mortgage industry tanked. But partly, I think the second one is that I was too much of a thorn in the side of the people I was working with this mortgage company. I was hired to be the training manager and build a training team for a division of a large national mortgage company that had multiple divisions. The corporate headquarters hired a VP of learning and development, and he had a director of learning and development under him. Both of them would constantly talk about their 30 years of experience. And finally, I just said, having 30 years of experience of being wrong is not 30 years of experience. It's just 30 years of experience being wrong. They were using, it's a big thing right now. If you're a teacher and you still buy into learning styles, abandon that now, because people who are in learning and development, we have research, we have evidence that shows that learning styles are not a thing. But this director and this VP, their hiring was based on learning styles, and they didn't have a process. I would ask them, "What is your process?" "Oh, well, things and stuff and yarn and glue, and we have 30 years of experience. We know how to do this." No, you don't. Do you have a strategic plan? Well, we're working on one. Well, here's mine. I wrote it in 3 days. Do you have any data to support your strategy? Well, no. It's like, okay, here's all the data I've already accomplished in the last week. So if you do, it's not uncommon, especially if you're constantly seeking knowledge. But hopefully you have better skills of diplomacy and politicking than I have, because I tend to just frustrate and anger people. But I'd rather people be angry because I'm telling the truth than blow smoke and have them think I'm a yes man and willing to do things the wrong way. I make people tell me no. I say, this is the right way. Here's all the evidence that it's the right way. Here's the processes that show it's the right way. This is what I'd like to do. And they say, no, we want it done this way. I'm currently working on a project that's exactly like that. I said, this project would be much better served if we set it up and we did it this way, where we're telling a story. And as we're telling a story, we're breaking out the whys of doing it this way in the story. And then we have people go through it. It's like, nope, just make it a click. And we're just adapting someone else's training. Just make it a click through. Okay. And then I get criticism from other people saying, well, it's just a click through. Yeah, because that's what you told me to do.
Love it, Rick. Thank you so much. I am going to post your LinkedIn URL once again. Oops, I posted it in the wrong spot. In the chat area. There you go, everybody. Hopefully, Rick, I'm sure you're going to go to LinkedIn and you're just going to have like a bunch of people that want to connect. So, Rick, that was great. I loved it. Thank you so much for, I really appreciate your perspective on this. It's something that I think that everyone that's in the audience needs to hear. And I'm really grateful for you taking the time to share with us.
Sure thing. I don't know if you can do this, but if you want, I could go into it. I could create a table. And if people want to have one-on-one conversations or 1-on-8 conversations, I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah. If you want to, I'm not sure on the participant side. Yeah, I think you can create a table. That option is available for you. Feel free to do that. Do you recall? Otherwise, I can create it for you.
I have no idea. I accidentally stumbled into chat rooms with Karen North and Ricky Fisher and Allison yesterday.
Let me make it right now. I'll make it right after this. And actually we have what, 3 starting. I saw a thing. Yeah, Bela is taking over Kayleen's. That's going to be happening in a few minutes. And then Christina Archer is in there and Allison Solers. And then now we're going to have Rick in one as well. So let me do that. And then don't forget 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. Kim Scott is going to be with us talking about life after teaching. There's more to L&D than ID, than instructional design. I think that's going to be fantastic. Kim is great. So please come back for that. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and close out the session. Thanks for being here, everybody.
Thank you for attending, y'all.